Hello. Welcome to Transforming Worry. I'm just going to wait for a few people to jump on. It's a bit exciting. It's very, very happy to be bringing you this course. It's one that I've been thinking about for a while. If you've read the sales page, you'll know. It's such a funny thing because it's... when I was thinking about doing the course, I did get into that real loop around, all of this stuff around, time and pressure and all this sort of stuff, and just, again, quite ironically, getting caught up in that whole process of worry, which then delayed me doing a worry course, which is quite funny, really. Anyway, we'll learn all about that tonight. And if you want to just give me a shout out as you're jumping on, that'd be great, because that'll give me an idea who's out there. We've got quite a few new people joining us tonight, which is such a pleasure and a delight for me. I know we have a very busy world, and it's always a delight when new people find us and hear our message and resonate with it, and then want to jump on board and then start doing some of our free workshops. And that's something for me which is I'm really passionate about, being able to offer value to people who may not really be that well acquainted with psychology or anxiety, depression, and really... Oh, hello, Jamie. That's great. Oh, dear. So it is such a big part of our mission here under the Bodhi Tree is to reach out and to be able to start to, I guess, dispel some of the myths around anxiety and depression, and to be able to make this information accessible. And Jade, excellent. That's wonderful. So it is a big part of our mission. So when we find new people jumping on and finding us, it is always such a pleasure and a delight. And so welcome to everybody who is new. I just think because we have got so many new people, even though obviously I'm very well known to Jamie and Jade, I did think I would introduce myself, and I know people might be watching this later on replay, so I will do a little bit of an introduction. And so I'm Tony Ann, and so I do all the content and all the rest of it for Under the Bodhi Tree, and I have my partner in crime, Dean, who does all the techie stuff. And so it is, we would be not under the Bodhi Tree without Dean's help. So whenever there's any sort of interaction, it'll be with either myself or with Dean, and together we create Under the Bodhi Tree. And so I'm a psychologist, and I practice in Darwin, and I have a bricks and mortar practice, I like to call it, and I also do these courses online. And obviously if you found us, you might have read some of the blog posts. That's part of my intention, is to be able to, I guess, give this information to people, to orient people to know a little bit more about what psychology is, like I said before. And so it is really super exciting to be able to do this course, particularly because if we look at the rates of anxiety and depression, we know that they are sadly on the way up. And so as a psychologist, to me, what that says to me is job not done. The mental health system at the moment is not meeting the need. And so that's a really big part of our mission, is to actually say, well, maybe if we made it a bit more accessible, maybe if people could have this information, right in the comfort of their own home, then maybe some of those things could start to be addressed a little bit more. And so particularly, with worry, and we'll talk a little bit more a bit later about the link between anxiety and worry, how they're related. But we know that about 25% of the population will be suffering from anxiety at any one point in their life. So that's quite a large percentage if you think about it, that a quarter of the population will suffer from anxiety, and it's more for depression. And so this is just something that we absolutely really need to change, and it's a big part of my passion and a big part of my mission. So that's probably enough about me. I'm just noticing my crazy I was just putting Bodhi to bed. I think you guys will appreciate this. I was putting Bodhi to bed, and he's like, "I miss you, Mummy." And he gave me this present, this crazy hair. This is from Kirstine, Austin Found. Just a shout out to Austin Found. And so I'm just noticing my crazy hair because I just think it looks cool. Oh dear. Anyway, I'd just like to maybe just give a little bit of an idea about the framework of the course. So I did say 90 minutes, and that will really all depend on you guys. You know, if you've got lots of questions and you want lots of engagement, then certainly, you know, we can go for as long as we need to. A big part of what I'm here for is to give you what you need, and if you need more from me, then I'll definitely make that space and time available. Obviously, if there's any questions, if you're watching it on the replay a little bit later and you have any questions, then please just, you know, sing out, and I'll be monitoring the comments to be able to, you know, give you again what it is that you might need. So for tonight it is going to be experiential. So by that I mean we're going to run through some processes, and I'm going to be asking you some questions so you can really start to tune in with some of your own experience of worry, and we're also going to be doing some relaxation. So that was again a big part of what it is that I wanted to do here tonight, was to actually give you an experience of, I guess, the possibility of being able to transform worry, and for you to be able to leave this workshop feeling that you've got some skills and that you actually feel different after finishing tonight's course. And so it is absolutely possible, particularly when we know what worry is. You know, with anxiety, information is key. So when we have the information and the knowledge, that's a big part of managing anxiety and worry. And if we look at, you know, my hand model of the brain, which, you know, probably everybody's seen by now, that this here is the fight-flight response, the limbic system, and this is where the anxiety comes from. And so here, you know, that's where it all kind of drives the anxiety from the limbic system, the amygdala, the fight-flight. And so what we want to start to do is to be able to have the information that we need, which tells, you know, the limbic system, switch off, it's okay, you know, I don't need to be concerned about this or worried about this. But we'll talk a little bit more about that as the course goes on. So my intention is for it to be experiential, so you'll actually have an experience of these techniques here tonight, and by the end of tonight then you will hopefully have had a little bit of a shift, and you will have had a really deep experience where you will feel that, you know, that transforming your worry is actually a possibility for you. I'd just like to perhaps start with a little bit of further to the experiential side of things. I'd like to start with a little bit of just a check-in, because I know people have busy lives, and you might have had a bit of a crazy day. I know certainly, crazy hair. I've had a crazy hair to go with my crazy day. And so, you know, sometimes, you know, particularly if you're prone to worry or to anxiety, then, you know, we often don't stop and do that check-in, and we just keep going and going, and, you know, that can relate or create, I should say, an escalation cycle of anxiety. And so I just want to do a little bit of a check-in and a bit of an experiment, and if you're feeling brave enough, you can pop your comments in there. But I just want to do just a pulse check, and you can get your pulse here. Yep, I can feel mine there. Or some people can feel it in their wrist. I can't seem to find it there, but if you can find, or sometimes you can actually feel it up here on at the top of your arm, if you can see that as well. But that's another good one. I like to do mine here. So we're just going to do a pulse check, and just to see what your heart rate is at the moment, because that's definitely something that we'll talk a little bit more about as, you know, the course progresses. So if you can, and then I'm going to start the clock for 60 seconds, and I just want you to count your heart rate when I say go. Okay, ready? Go. So stop that there. Okay. And so if you're feeling brave enough, you can pop in there what your heart rate was, or you can just note it down somewhere for yourself. And so if we look at a sort of a normal, let's say, be it not anxious or not super low heart rate, that a resting heart rate usually is between 70 and 100 beats per minute. And so mine was, I know I started maybe a second or so late, so let's say mine was about 92, because I just needed to add a couple more because I sort of did it a bit late. So 92, so that's sort of a resting heart rate, a not anxious or not elevated, I should say, heart rate. And so, the importance of that is if we look at, what is anxiety, then what we find is that it's a physiological response, and the heart rate or the heartbeat is something that changes. So you might find that if you're particularly anxious or you're put in an anxious situation, then your anxiety is going to go up and your heart rate is going to go up. And so people sometimes feel it's like really pounding in their chest. And no, this is intentional. This is all part of that fight-flight response, which is intended then to get the the blood to the big muscles in order to fight or flee. And so, so if you're if you're below, then, you might be some sort of athlete or, just having a low heartbeat rate kind of day, relaxed kind of day. Or if you're above 100, then that suggests that, that your fight-flight is on or that your heart rate is elevated, which could suggest anxiety. And so, it is really important that, we look at, the heart rate as one indicator of elevated anxiety. And if we want to start to lower the elevation of the fight-flight response or the nervous system, then relaxation is a big part of that, and that's something that we'll be talking a bit more about tonight. But I'd just like to start with a little breathing technique. And so if you're comfortable to do so, I just ask you just to close your eyes. And I find that it's helpful, just as a bit of soothing, just to put your hand either on your chest or on your tummy. And just close your eyes. And I'd just like you to turn your attention inward. And just focus on your breathing, the rise and fall of your breath. Not trying to change it in any way at the moment. Just noticing the gentle rise and fall of your breath. And just notice any resistance you might have to doing this. You might have some pushback. What are we doing this for? Or I don't have time for this, or I've got things to do. Just noticing, or you might just enjoy just relaxing there, closing your eyes. And just noticing the gentle rise and fall of your breath. And you might notice it in some places more than others. So you might notice your chest rising and falling, or your tummy rising and falling. Or you might notice it through the nose. Just bringing your awareness to wherever you notice it most strongly. And what I'd like you to do now is just see if you can take a few deep breaths. And so just breathing in, and you might notice as you breathe in a little bit more deeply that your tummy expands. So this is the diaphragmatic breathing, where we're noticing that the tummy expands. And just take a couple of deep breaths there. And on the out breath, you might say, relax, or release, or let go. I am here. And if your mind wanders, just bring it back to your breathing. And so now I'd just like you to bring your attention back just to a normal rate of breathing. Again, not trying to change it in any way. And just noticing you can bring your awareness just to the gentle rise and fall of your breath. Okay, and you can open your eyes if you had them closed when you're ready. And what I'd like to do is to do a little check-in and see how you're going there with yourself. And what we're going to do is we're going to do the heart rate test again. And so if you can find your pulse again, wherever you found it. We're going to do that again. And so when I say start, you just count, and then I'll say stop, and then you obviously will stop. Okay, ready? Go. Stop. Okay, so just compare those two numbers and to see, how did you find that? Just to notice if there was a difference between the first number and the second number. There was a slight difference. Mine was 85 the second time. So this is a slightly different, just a lowering, yeah. And hopefully you experienced that too, because the breathing technique is something that is really key for managing the nervous system arousal. And we'll talk a bit later about why that might be. And it's really, really key because we can take it anywhere. So your breathing technique is something that you can do anywhere at any time, and it is something that directly talks to the nervous system to switch off. It's okay. So if we look at our nervous system as having like an accelerator and a brake, that we have the accelerator being all the anxiety or the fight flight, and the brake being our relaxation response. And so it is something that we can use. The breathing is something that we can use anytime, anywhere we need it in order to be able to lower that elevation, so that then you can start to feel a little bit better within yourself. So it's absolutely key because it is something that you can take anywhere, anytime. So yeah. So hopefully you had a good experience with that, and it's something that what I encourage people to do is to practice that one. So it's sort of like that idea of, when do you want to learn to use your parachute? Do you want to learn to use your parachute when you're sort of jumping out of the plane, or would you like to have had a few trial runs and to know a little bit about how the parachute works before you actually jump out of the plane, if that's something you ever want to do? So importantly then, we're practicing the breathing technique, even if you don't feel anxious, because sometimes if you're prone to worry, worry is one of those things that is really quite insidious because it's just there on the back burner. You know, it's just there as this running commentary that kind of just creates this sense of unease. And so it's not, oftentimes you can get really escalated, but oftentimes it's just there in the back burner and creating this underlying sense of unease, and so we can miss it. So even though, you know, you may not be registering anxiety or even worry, that it's possible that it's because it's just there on the back burner and you can't quite hear it. And so what's really good is if you can practice that, and yes, that means you will have it when you absolutely need it, but you can actually have it there as a tool so that then you can lower what we call that resting level of anxiety or resting level of worry. And so it can actually start to bring it back down again. And then, you know, you can have a little bit more emotional freedom, basically, emotional flexibility. And so now's the time. If you have any questions, just, you know, shout out and ask at any time. That's totally fine. I'd really like for you to think about this as something that, you know, as if you were in a live workshop, which, I mean, it is live, you know, unless you're watching it on replay, of course. But you know, if you were in a live workshop with me, like I've been doing live courses for probably about a decade now. And so, you know, in those live courses, well, face-to-face, I should say, that we do a lot of interaction questioning, and that's where you get the most learning. It's so much better when it sort of comes out of your own mouth, or if you've got a question that you ask it straight away because you might forget it. So, you know, it is really important that you treat it like that, just so you get the most out of your learning. And so what I'm going to do now is just to ask you some questions, and, you know, they're just questions for you to ponder, but they're also questions if you want to do some writing, then you can. So I'd just like to tune in with where you're at the moment around what for you is worry. So, you know, if you're feeling happy enough, you know, you can answer, you know, what is worry for you? How would you define worry? So you can either just write that in your journal, or if you're happy enough, you can write it in the comments. What is worry? And sometimes that can be a little bit hard to answer if you're prone to worry and you haven't really thought about it before. You may find that difficult to answer. And so you might also ask, how do you know when you're worrying? How do you know when you're worrying? What are your cues, signals? You know, some people notice, you know, that they have, you know, this thoughts that go round and around in their mind that they can't get out of their mind. Yeah, some people notice that they do feel keyed up or on edge. You know, what are your signs? You know, how do you know when you're worrying? Yeah, racing thoughts. Yep, that's right. That's a good one though, because, you know, that suggests that you're in tune with your thoughts, which is great. Because they're the things that we want to actually start to address. So if you are noticing racing thoughts, obviously we need to slow them down to be able to catch them, but, you know, that's a really good one. Yep. And just to tune in with yourself and just to ask, you know, what are the downsides of worry? Like, obviously you've noticed this course and you've thought, yes, this is something that you want to do. What do you notice are the downsides of worry? Like, obviously racing thoughts is, you know, unpleasant, but what are some of the downsides of worry for you? Or the not so good things about worry? And that might sound like a funny question, you know, because, you know, obviously you're here and you're wanting to change worry, but worry comes with all sorts of ideas, or sometimes can come with ideas about worry actually being a good thing. So sometimes people have thoughts like, worry prepares me. If I think about this for long enough, then maybe nothing bad will happen. So we can kind of see the avoidance component of worry with those sorts of thoughts. Other sort of positive beliefs about worry, if you like. That if I worry about others, it shows them that I care. And so, that whole idea of, we're a family of worriers and we just all care so much. But if you have been on the receiving end of a worrier, or if you notice, that you tend to worry about those that you love, then, that's obviously an unpleasant experience often for you. And sometimes it then really gets in the way. Sometimes people can get a bit irritated with you because you're just like, they want their freedom. And so, but it's not something that you can help, but it is something that can really get in the way. And maybe then some of the good things about worry, maybe I've just alluded to one there a minute ago about, helping for you to be prepared. What are some of the good sides of worry that you notice? Or if you notice, the good things about worry, or things that you might say to yourself about worry. Does it sort of help you to feel a bit more prepared, or does it feel a bit weird if you're not worrying? Sometimes that can be the case for people, that if everything is all going well and they go, oh my God, everything's going well. Oh God, now I've got to worry about that. Something bad's going to happen. This sense of foreboding, like if worries, you've got nothing to worry about, then we kind of worry about not worrying. So, there's a sense there that, maybe there is something that you're getting out of it. And this question is, just for you to tune in and just have a bit of a think about, how much time does it take? How much time does worry take up in your life? How much room does it take up in your life? How much space does it take up in your life? And if you kind of, tuned into the sort of the racing thoughts and things like that, then you might have a bit more of an awareness of how much time it takes. Yeah, or if it's just sort of this low grade sort of anxiety, you might sort of tune into that to say, well, how much time does that take? And just finally, just to tune in with yourself and ask, why is it that you want to transform your worry? You've attended here or you've signed on, and you're watching it on the replay, then, why is it? Why do you want to transform your worry? Like, what is that? What's that about? Why are you here? You just might want to jot it down and just have a bit of a reflection on that. Why are you here? Why do you want to transform your worry? Is it time? Is it that you've been a worrier for long enough? That you notice that it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy. That you see that it limits you. We heard earlier that it's it's a form of avoidance. Is it something that that's you're ready for that to change? That you see that it limits you. You worry rather than live. Or that you worry as opposed to live in alignment with your values. Why are you here? Okay. So just to go over some of those things, even though I've just sort of touched on some of them as we've proceeded, basically when we look at, what is worry, ultimately what we start to look at, and I have been talking about it throughout so far, that obviously there is a link between worry and anxiety. That should be obvious to you by now. But worry essentially is the thinking component of anxiety. So there's lots of different types of anxiety, and one of those types of anxiety involves more of what we call that generalized anxiety, where we sort of just tend to worry about things and just mull them over and have them going through our mind a lot of the time. And so that kind of anxiety has that repetitive nature. So the worries are, repetitive, recycled thoughts that go over and over again in your mind. And so they tend to have the what if thinking. So worry tends to sound a little bit like, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if this happens? And so it is one of those things that looks at, worry specifically, looks at the worst case scenario. So what if this happens? It's not like, what if I won the lottery and I could travel the world and, just be fabulous, or, whatever you might think about winning the lottery. But it doesn't tend to be, what if the best case scenario? No, because it's linked with the anxiety, that it tends to be the worst case scenario. And so, if you've read the introduction to the course, which there was quite a bit of information in there, that you'll know that, that's a biological thing. We're biologically, survived, essentially. It's an advantage to be able to think in the worst case scenario, to have that negative filter. We're probably sitting here, you and I, having this conversation, because our ancestors were warriors, not so anxious that they didn't leave the cave, otherwise they would have starved, but just anxious enough to just make sure that they just, stayed out of the way of most dangers. But these days, it can get really either out of control, or it can really limit quality of life, and that's where we know that it's something that we want to address, because quality of life is being impacted. So if we look at worry relates to anxiety. So we've got the physiological symptoms of anxiety, and then the thinking side of it, which are the what ifs. And they work hand in glove. So the more anxious you are, the more worried you can be. The more worried you can be, the more anxious you can become. And it's just this anxious escalation cycle, which can leave, if you've got, a lot on your plate, then, that can leave you feeling pretty debilitated at times. And so it's really worthwhile looking at the escalation cycle and how your worry sort of talks you in to feeling worse and worse, basically. So we sort of talk ourselves into this escalation cycle. And so it's really, really important, again, if we talk a little bit more about that, the link between worry and anxiety, that the fight-flight response is something that is there as a protective mechanism. So obviously fight-flight, that triggers when we feel like we're under threat in some way. And so, if you think about if you've ever had the door slam on you, or a car backfiring or whatever, and you startle, that's your fight-flight response kicking in order to, help you to survive. So if that was something else, got a gunshot or someone bursting into the room or whatever, then obviously that would, you'd be ready there to respond and to react, because your fight-flight response would be on and ready to go. And so it is really, there to help you, but, it can then get in the way, because with worry, we've got this, if we've, got this anxiety sitting there, your brain wants to explain it in some way. It says, okay, well, I'm feeling anxious. There must be something out there. There must be a threat out there. Whereas if you're prone to worry, then it may not necessarily be the case, so we end up doing what we call the shadow boxing, that there's nothing really there, but because we're anxious, we're scanning, we start looking to try and explain why it is we're anxious, other than, we're anxious because we're anxious, we've had a busy day, or hormonally we're a bit out, or, whatever. That, sometimes, that fight flight can be there, busy day, stress, that type of thing. But with worry, it'll attach itself to that fight flight, and then off it goes. So it'll say, oh, well, what if this, so, but what we do, as opposed to sort of tuning in with our state at the time, we'll jump into the worry, we'll jump into that thought, and we'll go, oh, okay, yeah, well, what if that does happen? What if that does happen? And so the problem with worry, though, is is it doesn't necessarily go to answer that question. It just says, what if this happens? What if that happens? Oh, that'd be really bad. And it's sort of like it's going around and around in your mind. It tells you that it's doing something purposeful. So you could sit there and mull it over and worry about it all you like. And it tells you that it's doing something purposeful. But if you actually really look at it, it's not really doing anything. You're just spinning your wheels, basically. And so we can define worry as trying to problem solve in your head. And that is how it's defined, essentially. What if thinking, worst case scenario, and worry is an attempt to problem solve those concerns, but in your head. And so usually because there's a fear component below it, we only get so far. Yeah, so we'll be worrying, but because it's scary, we go, oh, don't think about that. So there's the avoidance component. Oh, that's scary, don't think about it. Oh, that's scary, don't think about it. And so that's one of the automatic responses. So we sort of flee, basically. We try not to think about it. But if we actually look at that, and I'm just going to try a little experiment with you, and I want you to say, sorry, just hang on a sec. Just going to see. Here we go. Sorry, someone's just asked to join. They probably want to jump on, so just let them do that. And so I'm just going to try a little experiment with you, and I just want you to don't think of a pink pig. Don't think of a pink pig on roller skates. Don't think of a pink pig flying an aeroplane. Don't think of a pink pig in a purple tutu. Yes. I wonder what you did. I wonder what you did. If you're like most people, which I assume you are, that mostly what we will do is obviously we'll think of the pink pig, and then we'll try not to think about it. And so we'll have this sort of repetitive cycle where we think about it, and then we try not to think about it, and then we go, okay, what is it that I'm not thinking about? Pink pig, okay, don't think about that then. And so here we go on this sort of merry-go-round where we are trying not to think about something, but the more we try not to think about it, the more we actually think about it. And so it's a trap, basically, that actually makes the anxiety and it makes the worry worse over time. And so ultimately what we want to do is to try and learn about how to manage those worries in a different way, because the ways in which we automatically do it are flawed. They're automatic. They come from our nervous system. But if we look back to that hand model of the brain, it all comes from here. That's very rudimentary. Is it a threat? Yes or no? But oftentimes threats have nuances. So yes, it might be scary, but sometimes it's worthwhile doing anyway. But the limbic system, amygdala, doesn't make those distinctions. It says, scary, run away. And so we want to start to engage some thinking. So that then allows the amygdala to dampen down, to go, okay, yes, I'm a bit scared, but this is worthwhile. I'm going to do this. And so it's really key when we're looking at managing worry that we're starting to engage the thinking part of the brain, because all what we're relying on then is that automatic response, which is, either that don't think of a pink pig, or whatever that concern is. And the more we do that, the more we actually escalate the anxiety, and the more we actually think about that feared thing, that concern. The other thing we do is we try to think about it, more and more and more. If we really, really nut it out and really think about it, then we'll absolutely, hit the nail on the head, and it won't be a problem anymore. But what happens with that is when we are, it's a physiological response. When we are afraid, we get tunnel vision. And that's actually, the pupils, shrink to be able to focus very specifically on the threat. And so if you are trying to problem solve in an anxious state of mind, all of your creativity is unavailable to you. And so if you think, trying to think your way through it, then chances are that's not going to work for you, because there's probably myriad options that you could implement to manage that worry or that concern, and we're just not really in the mode to be able to do it. We're not in creative problem-solving mode, we're in worry mode, which really just serves to create more and more anxiety and to shut down creative options. And so it is super key that we look at, okay, yes, you might have concerns, but what is the state of mind that we want to be in when we're looking at those concerns? And that's why we started the course doing the relaxation. So we did that, that focusing on your breathing so that you can start to unhook and be present with what it is that we're going to be looking at, which are some of the concerns. And that's really strategic because we need to be in the right frame of mind to actually problem solve. And worry is not that frame of mind, basically. So, yeah, so that's really, really important. Okay, so, and if you have any questions, just give me a shout out. Happy to answer any questions. I think I've addressed all of that. Okay, so now I want to move on to the thinking side of the anxiety. So we've already established that there's a physiological component, which is that, the heart racing and, racing thoughts, the pupil narrows, the focus narrows so you can focus on, getting rid of the threat. And these are all physiological changes, but there are the thinking components that we absolutely need to address in order to be able to manage worry. So when we look at managing worry, we do the two. We manage the elevation of the nervous system and we manage the thinking as well. And, with that, we absolutely can change the experience that you have with worry. And so if we look at the ideas that drive anxiety, drive anxiety generally, actually, is that something bad's going to happen. Something bad is definitely going to happen. So there's a high likelihood that it's going to happen. It'll be really bad if it does happen. And you won't cope with it if it does happen. Yeah. So just thinking about your experience of anxiety, something bad's going to happen. It's definitely going to happen, or it's a high likelihood of it happening. It's going to be really bad if it happens, and that you won't cope with it if it does happen. Yeah? And so even though it may not feel like this when you are a worrier or when you are anxious, just further to that, when you're looking at worry, that's what drives the worry. So as I said before, there's lots of different types of anxiety, but this one we're focusing on the worry. When we're looking at what drives the worry, it's that what if this happens, or that'd be really bad. Yeah, oh God, it's really likely to happen, and I won't cope with it if it does happen. So, it really ties in there with the what if thinking, the worst case scenario, the catastrophe, basically. And so again, even though it may not feel like it at the time when you're in the anxiety and you're in the worry, that these ideas tend to be an overestimation. Yeah, so an overestimation of the odds of something bad happening. So for example, bad example, probably Henny Penny, what if the sky falls, so, well, that's a really low likelihood of it happening. But anxiety, when you're in an anxious state, it will tell you, well, no, either it's a really, really high likelihood of it happening, but even if we challenge that, well, it's a low likelihood, but, that you've still got that 1% chance. So we absolutely still need to look at the other sides of it. So, but with that one little piece, if we look at likelihood, usually it'll amplify or exaggerate the likelihood of something bad happening. Yeah. Often it exaggerates how bad it would actually be. And so, it's like it'd be terrible, or it would be a catastrophe. We use really emotive language when we think about those concerns, and it really then amplifies it and drives the anxiety upward. Like, it's really bad. And then we wouldn't cope, say, oh God, I'd just fall to pieces, and you might even say, oh, I just wouldn't cope. Yeah, or I'd fall to pieces, or I'd just be a heap, and I'd just be a mess, or whatever language you might use around that. So they're the four key drivers that drive the anxiety. And I've got a really good example of that, which happened to me today. And so I'd just like to just put that one out there, because we had our house checked for termites today. I found a little spot on the ground, which to me looked, in my very novice mind, looked very much like termite activity. And yes, so we got the house checked for termites, and yeah, as it happens, it was termite activity. And so, and it was really interesting because the person who checked our house for termites, he was a bit of a character, but he was a bit of a, I mean, obviously we're going to have to get the house fixed or whatever, but he was a bit of a fearmonger. And so he comes to me after doing a bit of the check, and he says, well, I've got good news and I've got bad news. And the good news is you've got termites. And it was just so, to me, it was like, it was really funny because it was like, okay, the good news is I've got termites. Okay, so what's the bad news? And so we can really look at that, you know, as a potential threat. Okay, so my house is crumbling down around me. Like, what's the bad news here? But he just sort of had this way about him, which was sort of quite fear mongering, as it were. And so just in that scenario, just to talk you through it. You know, we can say, you know, if that went into the worried mind, you know, so we go, well, okay, so the good news is I've got termites. You know, so we could really see how that would go into the worry mill. Okay, so I've got termites and, you know, yeah, there's lots of activity apparently. And so what's going to, you know, the house is going to fall down around me and we're just going to live in a steel structure and it's just going to be terrible, or it's going to cost thousands of dollars and we just you know, not going to be able to live here anymore, or, you know, just be terrible. Yeah, and I just wouldn't cope with that. Like, how am I going to live without a house, you know, or something like that, you know, or what's going to happen to my children? You know, they're going to be, you know, we're going to have to go and live with grandma or something like that. So we can kind of see how that idea chucked into the worry mill, you know, how that could potentially, if I was already, you know, quite anxious, you know, that could be something that could, you know, tip you over the edge into quite a bit of worry and quite a bit of anxiety. And so coming through that then, we can kind of just talk that bit through. So when we're looking at managing worry, what we want to do, and this is a really good example, is to actually start to question those assumptions. Something bad's going to happen, definitely going to happen, won't cope with it if it does. Yep. So we want to be able to start to question. But if we look at potentially what happens when it goes into the worried mind, you know, we could see how, you know, you might start to go, oh God, I don't even want to think about that. You know, that sounds really terrible. And so we might not want to, you know, potentially what can happen, you know, is that we might not want to explore that any further. Just go, I don't want to know. And so this is where, you know, we can start to see, you know, some avoidance starting to happen, where we go, okay, well, I just don't want to know anymore. And if you're really highly anxious and, you know, again, it's robbing you of your creativity, then it really can lead into very much inactivity, avoidance, basically. And so rather than going into problem solving mode, which is what we want to do, and perhaps what we think we're doing when we're worrying, worry tells you it's purposeful, it tells you it's doing something. And so instead of actually going into that and saying, well, let's problem solve it, if it went into the worried mind, it could be, you know, what if this happens? What if that happens? Escalation. What am I going to do? And then repeat. Yep. So it doesn't really have a solution, as it were. It's repetitive. It goes around and around, and it doesn't lead to action. And that's the key. That's where you know that you're worrying, is because it doesn't lead to action, you know. So basically we can start to see we're worrying about things instead of taking action on things. And so, you know, that's certainly an option. Or we could start to overthink it. We just, you know, think and think and think and think, again, instead of taking action. So we can either avoid it or we can overthink it. Oh, when was the last time we had it topped up? And, you know, who's to blame? Or, we start to overthink, you know, I guess, all of the components and all the aspects of it instead of actually taking action. So ultimately what we see is inaction, inactivity, as opposed to now we're moving forward with it. And so what we want to do then is to actually start to address the above drivers. So something bad's going to happen. It's, you know, definitely going to happen, high likelihood. It'll be really bad and I won't cope. So in this scenario, you know, we could say, okay, so what's the worst case scenario here for us? So we say, well, there's termite activity. Well, the walls are still standing, but, that's questionable. Maybe they'll fall down, So it's a steel structure. Worst case scenario, we live in a steel structure, worst case scenario. How likely is that? Well, it's a possibility, but as far as likelihood goes, he's gone through and he's tapped the walls quite hard. He hasn't broken through any. So, no worse than the damage the kids have done, basically. So probably a moderate to low likelihood. And, how bad would that be if we had to live in a steel structure and, get the house replastered? Well, it's not great. That would be, thousands of dollars. So it wouldn't be great. And, I certainly wouldn't like to have to take the kids and live somewhere else whilst all that happened. So it wouldn't be great, but it probably wouldn't be that bad. So could I survive it? Well, yes. And so how would I cope? So that comes to, and that's the key bit, how would you cope? And that is absolutely key, because what drives all of this really is this sense of just, not being able to cope, not being capable, of being able to manage the consequences of that worst case scenario. And so here, what we find, and this again may not necessarily potentially ring true if you're a worrier and anxious, but what we tend to find, and when we start to do experiments, that what we tend to find is that people who are anxious or people who worry tend to underestimate their capacity to cope. Yeah, so think about that. Tend to underestimate the capacity or their capacity to cope. So what that means is when push comes to shove, that although the mind says that you won't cope, when you're actually in the situation, well, you just do. Yeah, you're better at it than you think you are. And this, again, may not ring true, but this is why you do experiments, to prove it to yourself. And that has to be the case, because when you're looking at, back to hand model of the brain, that when we're looking at anything that comes from the amygdala, the fight flight, it's survival. So you're not going to take my word for it. You have to prove it to yourself. Yeah. So this means the only way out is through with anxiety, where we, do some experiments and we say, well, okay, what's the worst case scenario? Could you cope with that? Well, I hope so. This is how I might cope with that. So in this scenario, how would I cope with that? Well, if we did have to do some, renos, then, again, I could go and stay somewhere else, or we've got the benefit of a second dwelling. We could go and set up a camp kitchen, or, various things that you could run through with that to say, well, this is how I would cope with that. And so, worst case scenario, the whole house, well, not the whole house because it's a steel structure, but all the insides fall down, then that would be, again, not great, but we would survive it. And so we would go through some strategies. Okay, well, this is how we'd manage the stress. This is how we would manage the children. This is how we would manage the work, so and you could go through, each concern that you have and problem solve it. Yeah, so instead of going into worry and, what if and catastrophizing, oh, Caro, hooray, how you going? So instead of going up to that escalation cycle, then, we can actually really start to problem solve it and be really, strategic with how we manage that. Yeah, because, if managing your anxiety is important to you or managing your worry is important to you, then it is super key that we prioritize it. And we say, well, yeah, if I'm concerned about it, then I need to pay attention to it. And that is another key strategy when it comes to worry, that it's really, really important, if we look at the survival mechanism of the brain, that when you have a concern, that you try and disregard. Yeah, I've got a concern and that's silly. I've got a concern and, well, that's never going to happen. Like, you kind of talk yourself out of worry, but nonetheless it's still there. It is absolutely key that we start to treat all worries as important. Yeah, because when we do that, we can actually start to then be discerning and say, and I like to use the term, is it a signal? Yeah, which is saying pay attention. So obviously termite activity is a signal. Pay attention, do something about it. But if it's noise, what if I get termites, but the termite people have come, there's no termites here, there's no termite activity, your house is going to be fine, but I continue to worry about it, well, that's noise. And further to that, I guess, The termite people come and they do the treatment, and the best treatment that we could possibly do, it's the only thing that we've got available to us, that's all I can do, and I continue to worry about it, that's noise. Because I've taken action on the problem, I've done what I can. If there's still, that background worry about it, that's noise, because there's nothing else that I could possibly do, and that's just probably indicative of my anxiety being high. And so with worry, we have to treat all worries at first as signals, and then we can sort of carve them off. Well, that's a signal. I need to pay attention to that one. I need to problem solve that, and we've got strategies to do that. All the others are noise. And so the other part of it is the noise, which is there's a really low likelihood of it happening. Yeah, so that's sort of a noise type worry, but we still work through those questions, because even if it's a low likelihood of it happening, and you just try this on for yourself, you've got a concern that no one else is concerned about, and so they tell you not to worry. Yeah, or to not be silly, or whatever, they dismiss it somehow. But if it's something that your worry has attached itself to, or your anxiety has attached itself to, no amount of dismissing it is going to work for you. Even if it is noise and you say, well, that's just ridiculous, even if it is noise, you will still attach yourself to it, or the anxiety will, I should say. And so we have to address it anyway. Even if it is a low likelihood, then we need to address it anyway, just for our own well-being, to kind of switch off that fight-flight, switch off the anxiety. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So within that, we've got, again, those 4 drivers. Yeah, so something bad's going to happen. It's definitely going to happen. It'll be really bad and I won't cope. And so we start to then question. Yeah, and you might want to write those down, but I will be giving you some of this information in some of the resources that I promised you for this free workshop as well. So that'll be coming your way. When we address those drivers, we question. We just turn those things into a question. So what is the worst case scenario? And we absolutely have to here probably experience some anxiety and really get to a worst case scenario. What is bad about that? So sometimes worry is tricky and it doesn't really give you the thing that's scaring you the most. And so what we can do with that is we just ask, well, what's the worst case scenario? What's the worst possible thing that I can imagine? And people who tend to be worriers tend to really have great imaginations, and that's what I'm going to talk about in a minute. But people with anxiety, but particularly people with worry, who tend to worry, have great imaginations. They just imagine all these sort of worst case scenarios that are really quite outlandish and scary, and we scare the shit out of ourselves basically with our own imagination. And so the brain doesn't really know much difference between reality and imagination. So when we look at the functional MRIs, that the brain lights up in exactly the same way when you imagine doing something as when you're doing it. Yeah, the only difference is the motor cortex, because obviously imagination, you're not moving. And so when you look at, for example, people who are elite athletes, they go and they imagine, they do all that imaginal work. So, there's experiments done with basketballers, and, you've got a group who imagine, that they're shooting hoops and they're, getting it through. They're shooting hoops. Others just imagine playing basketball, and others don't do anything. And so when they do that for, 2 weeks, let's say, and then they go back and then they test how good they are. So they test how good they are at the beginning, and then they test how good they are at the end. And then, it's really quite amazing, because all they've done is imagining, no extra training done for any of them. At the end of that training, at the end of that 2-week period, or whatever that was, I can't remember exactly, but the people who imagined shooting hoops were infinitely better than the people who either just imagined basketball or imagined nothing or just did nothing. So really, really powerful. And so our brain, again, doesn't know the difference between what's actually happening and imagination. And so with worry, it works against us. Yeah, so we're just imagining all these really bad things, and we absolutely have to get to that key What is bad about that? And we just question. So what's the worst case scenario? What's bad about that? What's bad about that? What's bad about that? Yeah. And so, and you might want to write that down as well, because that's the key. We call that the downward arrow, where you can question to really what that key hot thought actually is. So you can then start to problem solve it, which is the other question. So what's bad about that? Once you get to the real worst case scenario, you go, so for example, in this scenario, well, I'll be homeless. Worst case scenario, we'll be homeless. Okay. How likely is that? Well, that's really unlikely. So if I stay at the top part, which is all my house is going to be eaten by termites, well, and you could do the same questioning, but it wouldn't be as powerful. So if I do the downward arrow and I ask what's bad about that, I get to, well, I'll be homeless. Well, that's pretty scary. Okay, that's a pretty scary thought. And you can say, well, how likely is that? Okay, how likely is that? Well, that's a really low likelihood. How bad would it be? Well, that would be pretty bad. But, I've got family or neighbours or, whatever, how bad would that actually really be? Well, we would survive it. Yeah, so it would be bad, but it wouldn't be, we would survive it. It wouldn't be a catastrophe as such. And so, that it's a low likelihood. It would be bad, but not catastrophic. And, how would I cope with that? Well, I'd probably experience some pretty tough days. It'd be pretty hard being homeless with children. But, again, we would be calling on, family support or, whatever it is. And so I'd come up with a coping strategy around that. And so really key then that we get to the hot thought and then we do that questioning, because it's at that point then you have got a plan. And when that thought pops into your mind, what if I've got termites? What if termites eat our house? I've got, a strategy there to talk back to that scary thought immediately. Yeah, because there's nothing surer than if it's a worry that it's going to come back. Yeah, so there's no point just thinking you can do that downward arrow, get to that thing and go, cool, no worries, that's done and dusted. Because like I said, the key calling card of worry is that it's repetitive. Yeah, it's a repetitive mode of thinking. And so it's going to come back. And so we need something to talk back to it. Yeah, so it's going to come back, well, this is what I would do. And so it's just a kindly sort of invitation to say, well, this is what I would do. If that happened, this is what I would do. And then over time, what we find is that then people don't worry about those specific concerns. Yep. And as you start to not worry about those specific concerns, then your anxiety comes down. And so we say thinking patterns are mood dependent. Yeah, so thinking patterns are mood dependent. So your thinking patterns depend on your mood. So if your mood is anxious, well, so are your thoughts. Yeah, and if your mood is more anxious, well, so are your thoughts. So they escalate and increase each other. And so it is super key that as we start to address those concerns, that the anxiety can come down, and then the worries are just less available, and that is how it works. And there are certainly other strategies there around managing worry, but that is the key one. So that right there, as you start to manage your worry, that would be how you would start to do it. So managing the elevation of the nervous system as well as the thinking. Without the thinking, no amount of relaxation is going to help you. And you may have tried that. I've meditated or relaxed or done my breathing or whatever, and it didn't help. Well, that's because we didn't have the thinking component. That is absolutely key. Yeah, and having a relationship with your inner world is absolutely key for any sort of quality of life, really, because that's really what drives everything. Your thoughts, your beliefs, all of that really does drive your experience and what you can achieve in your life. And so it's absolutely key to start to cultivate strategies to be able to turn inward and to get to know your inner world just that little bit better. Okay, so if there's no questions, I'd just like to put out there our course that we've got coming up further to this course. So if you've found tonight helpful, then what we've got coming up is it's a 5-week course that I'm going to run over 6 weeks, a transforming worry course specifically. And so over those 6 weeks, what you'll get is the more of what we've just talked about. So more of the basics of the anxiety. So relaxation strategies, specifically targeting worry. And I've done some of those audios just this last week or so, and it's really, really powerful. So what we've got there are some audios that look at talking you through that particular process. So problem solving worries, basically. And so to be able to talk you through that, so when you need it, you've got it right there. And so that's an audio process that you can work through. So, but the processes around managing your anxiety, so some of the relaxation strategies, but also some of those thinking strategies, because they're super, super key. But all the basics that you will need to be able to manage your worry. So that's within that course. But then this is the super exciting part. When I thought about doing a worry course, I said, well, what is most exciting to me to do? And it is about transformation. I'm all about transformation. And so absolutely, that's really what I wanted to do. And so when I thought about transforming my worry and looking at those what ifs, so if we look at the key feature of worry is what if, and that what if in the negative. So, what if, again, like my house gets eaten by termites, or what if this, what if that, to the negative. And so I like to call it turning worry into wonder. Yeah, so the what if thinking being towards the negative, with worry, turning worry into wonder, we can actually start to really ingrain wonder instead, which is, what if we could live in a really beautiful house that we absolutely loved? What if everything was going to work out okay? What if this was actually all part of the divine plan? What if this was all meant to happen? What if this was actually a good thing? So we actually start to turn worry into questions, wonders that we actually want to start to think about. And so we'll go into that in the course as well. So turning worry into worry into wonder, managing the what ifs, but managing the what ifs in a completely different way, in a transformational way, such that you won't ever be able to worry in the same way again. I've got and this is a bit hard to say, the worrier into warrior, because what we see with anxiety and worry is that it is a form of avoidance. So when we're worrying, we're not taking action. And so it is a form of avoidance. And so, and it gets in the way. What really, I guess, part of my passion is worry and anxiety just rob people of potential. And that, for me, I see myself as a potential hunter. So what I see when I see people is their potential, and what I see oftentimes is anxiety robbing people of their potential. And that is something, for me, that's a travesty, and I feel deeply and passionately about helping people with that. And so the worrier into warrior is about how you can start to tune into your worry, and as opposed to getting stuck in it, you can start to see what action is aligned for you, and to know how to make that step from all the worries into actually starting to take aligned action for you. And so as opposed to getting caught up in the fears, you can start to take aligned action in alignment with your values, in alignment with that which is most important to you. And that is transformative. Again, so the turning worry into wonder, that is transformative. Absolutely. You won't be able to worry in the same way again. And then from turning worrier into warrior, that you're actually starting to take action, where before you get caught up in all the anxiety and all the avoidance, that here we know the aligned action to take, and we can take it. We can bridge that gap. So that's another one. And then really looking at the worry beliefs. The worry beliefs are really, really important, because they're the things that under the surface drive that worry. And so when we look at changing the worry beliefs, oftentimes it's about competence, that underlying there somewhere, that you think that, that you're not really that capable, like we said, you're not going to cope, but that all relates to your confidence in your competence. And so we absolutely need to squirrel down and find those worry beliefs and those beliefs about yourself that are getting in the way. And so that's what the course will look at as well. And so I'm really super excited about that one, because again, your model of the world, the beliefs that you have, will absolutely determine where you end up. And I'm absolutely all about helping people to change where they end up by changing their model of the world. And we can absolutely do that. We can, through concerted effort, by knowing what you want to change, by being able to listen to those things that are tripping you up and to be able to know what you want instead, basically. So often we get caught up in survival mode and looking at what's happening now, as opposed to looking at what you want instead. And so that transforming worry component is absolutely all about being able to change the nature of the relationship with yourself and change the nature of your relationship with your worry so that your life does transform. But the other part, which I'm also super excited about, is that creative imagery, like I was talking about before. So this course is going to be super innovative in the sense that we're going to be using your powers of imagination for good. And so, again, lots of warriors have really great imaginations that backfire and work against them. And so within this course, what we're going to do is to be using your powers of imagination for good. So using your creative imagery. Sorry if you can hear that. That's my dog having a dream. Hang on a sec. Wake up. Hey. He was having a dream and making lots of noise. Oh dear. So yes, using your powers of imagination for good. So using the creative imagery, and this is super exciting because it's really powerful. Going back to the basketballers, all they did was imagine something different, and it actually resulted in real world tangible results. And so we can't get around that. If your imagery scares the crap out of you at the moment, then we absolutely can change that through all of this all taken together. And so coming back to the beliefs, what you'll have by the end of the course is an empowerment model. So as opposed to feeling really debilitated, that you'll have an empowering framework to launch yourself off into the world, so that, again, transforming your life through an empowerment model where you can actually feel capable, feel competent. And that's absolutely essential if you're going to have quality of life, if you're going to live in alignment with your values, if you're going to do what you want to do in the world. Then obviously we need to have this sense of empowerment, this sense that I can do it, and that if the worst case scenario happens, I can cope. What better gift could you have than that, really? And so also about sustainable change, that I'm absolutely, that's a big part of my message, is that change needs to be sustainable. Why I'm doing the course over 6 weeks, a 5-week course over 6 weeks, because I want you guys to have a chance to integrate the learning. And so because, I don't want you to just go and, have all this stuff that you don't actually use and don't integrate. And so my firm belief is that change needs to be sustainable. And how we do that is by starting to adopt the growth mindset. And so the growth mindset really is all about you being able to bounce back from adversity, because we look at challenge and mistakes and failures, if you want to call it that, in a particular way. So when the worst case scenario happens, and you're doubting yourself, could I cope? When we've got the growth mindset that comes up to meet that, then we go, well, actually, yeah, because even if the worst case scenario happens, at least I'm going to have a good way, a helpful way of being able to think about it, which is, that we're all learning, and this is something that you can start to embody. You may not necessarily believe that right now, but it is something that, you can start to embody, and that's absolutely super key. But that growth mindset allows you to make sustainable change. And so we'll be talking about that as well. And this is all part of creating a future to look forward to. So all of these strategies here, so we've got transforming worry, and then we've got creating a future for you to look forward to, because again, we're using all of these strategies to be able to create a future that you actually want to step into, as opposed to one that's fearful and that one's, that you then tend to avoid because of the anxiety. And then a key part of my message, and if you've been reading my blogs, this will come as no surprise to you, that with any course that I do, we've got the strategies there that are around cultivating kindness and self-compassion, because the absolute key with learning to manage anxiety, and particularly learning how to manage worry, and particularly about moving into, aligned futures and inspiring futures, that we absolutely need to have the safety net of self-kindness and self-compassion. And self-kindness really is about, wanting good things for yourself and feeling that's an okay thing to have and ask for. And that compassion really is being able to support yourself through times that are tough. This is hard right now, this is painful right now. And when you've got those skills cultivated, again, even in the worst case scenario, you know that you've got you there. And so that's the key part when, if you look at the the title or the subtitle about, transforming your worry, making it your friend. We make it our friend by listening to the signals, but we make it our friend by actually being kind to ourselves, learning how to be kind and learning how to nurture ourselves through difficult times. And so that's the course. It's a Transforming Worry course. So this is the free workshop, the Transforming Worry course that I'm offering to you now. Is transformative. So what you've got here tonight, there's lots of strategies in there and there's lots of information there that I know will just make a really, really big difference for you. If you want to further your learning, deepen your learning and truly start to make a difference in your own life around your worry, then the course is absolutely for you, because that's what it's about. That, they're 100% to be able to ensure that after that 6-week course, you've got a really embodied knowledge around how to manage your worry, and not only manage your worry, but transform it. So, a lot of, what you look at with your sort of treatment, if you like, for worry or anxiety is about managing it. I'm much more interested in transforming it, changing it so that it's unrecognisable to you, and you're unrecognisable to you because of how you manage it. Yeah, when it comes up, what you do with it, that you then alchemize it and then use it for good. To go, okay, well, thank you, that's good. How can I use this, for your betterment? And that transformation is absolutely something that will change your life, because you've actually got something different to do with it. It comes up, you've got to do something with it. You can either do what you've always done or you can do something different. So that's the course. We're going to drop the link in the live stream at the end. So if you absolutely know that this course is for you, then you can just click the link and you can go through, and then it'll tell you all about it. So I've got that all written down there on that page. You don't need to, if you've read the page before, you don't need to read it all again. You can just skip through down to the bottom, which has got all the information there about the course specifically, and it'll tell you all about it. If you need any more information, just let me know. But absolutely, if you're a worrier, you want to change, and that this course is for you. I've made it especially for you because it is something that, it just robs people of potential, and it doesn't need to. Basically, it doesn't need to. It can change. Okay, so if you have any questions, just sing out. But I would now like to start. I'd like to finish. Gosh, I'm just beginning. No. I'd like to finish just with a nice little exercise, which is going to be in your free resources that I'm going to email out to you. And yeah, if you want to just get comfortable and close your eyes again, if you feel comfortable to close your eyes. And once again, I'd just like you to put your hand on your heart or on your tummy. And just focusing on your breathing. The gentle rise and fall of your breath. And here we're not trying to change it, we're just turning your attention inward. Focusing on the gentle rise and fall of your breath. And I'm going to say some statements, and I'd like you to repeat them to yourself in your own head. And I'd just like you to really absorb the intention behind the statements. Just really absorb the intention. May I be well. May I be happy. May I be peaceful. May I be well. May I be happy. May I be peaceful. May I be well. May I be happy. May I be peaceful. Now I'd like you to think of a problem or a concern that you're facing right now, that you're experiencing right now. And it might be with a person or a situation or an event. It might be something you've got coming up or something you've got happening for you right now. And I'd like you to repeat the same statements. May you be well. May you be happy. May you be peaceful. May you be well. May you be happy. May you be peaceful. May you be well. May you be happy. May you be peaceful. And just really feeling into those intentions for this event or situation or person that you're struggling with at the moment. And if you feel any pushback, that's okay. We're just noticing the pushback. But just really giving yourself permission just to absorb the intentions and truly want these things for yourself and the situation. Just seeing if you can absorb that. And just notice any changes that you might feel towards the situation or person or event. As you have these intentions to be well, to be happy, and to be peaceful. And just to notice any internal shifts. So just bringing your awareness back to your breathing. And just doing an internal check, just checking where you are internally, how you're feeling. Just focusing on your breathing and just where you're at. And you can open your eyes when you're ready. My dog was scratching. I'm not sure if you were hearing that. Yeah, so that's it for the course. That's it for the workshop. And so I really hope that you have learnt something tonight, and I really hope that you've enjoyed those experiences of, trying on some of those relaxation exercises, and also that you've tried on some of the thinking as well. Just thinking about some of the concerns that you might have and working through some of those drivers of the worry. And just to notice, you might want to go, unless you want to go to bed, but if you've got some things on your mind that you might want to go through some of those questions with, that might be a good idea. Because that's really, where it all starts is actually knowing that these strategies can work for you as well. And that you do that by actually trying it on and thinking through and breaking that cycle of just the repetitive thoughts and avoidance and really going into problem solving mode and really taking care of yourself, basically. That if it's a concern for you, then it's a concern, full stop. And then you can actually start to work it through with the strategies that we've discussed tonight. And if you'd like to know more and you want to do, a little bit more of a deep dive and really to actually, step into a completely different relationship with your worry, then join us for the course, and we'll drop the link in for you. So I really hope to see you all on the course, and it's been a pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed it too. Okay, see ya.